I didn't argue at the dinner table. I didn't defend myself. I just opened my laptop and sent one email time-stamped, with the right names in CC. Then I closed it and went to bed. By morning, everything they'd been treating like automatic was on hold. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I live in a small desert town in the western part of the state. Out here, people size you up fast. They look at your truck, your clothes, the way you talk. If you don't look impressive, they assume you aren't. I've never been impressive on the surface. I keep my life simple. Same routines, same pace. I go to work, come home, fix what needs fixing, and stay out of other people's business. I don't talk much about what I do, because I never needed the credit. I met Linda when her daughter, Madison, was already almost grown. She wasn't a child who needed to be raised. She was a teenager with opinions, plans, and a very clear sense of who she thought mattered in the world. I didn't try to step into a role that wasn't mine. I never asked to be called Dad. I never corrected her when she introduced me by my first name. I figured respect, if it ever came, would come on its own. So I focused on one thing being useful when things went sideways. When Madison needed help filling out forms she didn't understand, I sat down with her. When she and Ryan decided to start a small project together and ran into licensing issues, I helped sort it out. When a bank wanted guarantees they didn't have, I stood in the gap. When deadlines were missed and paperwork came back rejected, I stayed up late fixing it. I didn't announce any of that. I didn't keep score out loud. I just handled it. At first, there were thank yous, real ones, awkward ones, but genuine. Then, slowly, those stopped. The help didn't, just the acknowledgement. That's how it usually goes. When you help once, people remember. When you help twice, they appreciate it. When you help for years, it stops registering as help at all. It becomes the baseline. I paid attention to that shift, but I didn't say anything. I told myself it didn't matter, that this was just what families did, that showing up quietly was better than being praised loudly. What I didn't realize at the time was that silence teaches people something, too. When you never push back, people learn that pushing you aside doesn't cost them anything. When you always clean up the mess, they stop seeing the mess as a problem. And when you keep absorbing the inconvenience, they start believing it doesn't inconvenience you at all. From the outside, it probably looked like I was just there, helpful, replaceable, easy. What nobody saw was that every favor had a name attached to it. Every form had a signature. Every approval had a responsibility tied to it. They saw effort. They didn't see authority. And I understand why. Authority isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It sits quietly in documents, permissions, and systems people don't think about until they stop working. Over time, my role in that family shifted without anyone ever discussing it. I wasn't asked what I thought anymore. I was informed. I wasn't included in decisions. I was looped in when something needed to be fixed. That didn't happen because anyone was evil. It happened because familiarity dulls gratitude. Because consistency gets mistaken for obligation. Because when someone always says yes, people forget that no is an option. I didn't notice when the line was crossed. Not at first. It happened slowly. One assumption at a time. You don't wake up one day and decide to be taken for granted. You just keep doing what you've always done, until one day you realize your presence only matters when it's convenient. And by then, everyone else thinks that's normal. That's the dangerous part. Not the moment someone dismisses you outright, but the years leading up to it, when your value gets quietly reclassified as background noise. I didn't think much of it at the time. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought patience was strength. I didn't know yet that patience, without boundaries, slowly erases your position. And once that happens, people stop seeing you as someone who chooses to help and start seeing you as someone who's supposed to. The dinner was held at the vineyard just outside town, where the land turns from dust to green if you have enough water and money. Long table, white lights, everyone acting calm in that careful way people do when something important is coming up. This was supposed to be a planning dinner. Final details, who speaks, who signs, who represents the family in public. Madison did most of the talking. She'd prepared notes, printed pages, a clear vision of how everything should look. She kept using the same phrases: the right people, the right roles, the right image. Ryan sat beside her, nodding when she looked his way. He didn't add much. He never did when things got tense. Linda moved plates, refilled glasses, found reasons to stand up and walk away from the table, every time the conversation got close to something uncomfortable. She disappeared into the kitchen. I stayed quiet, listened. At one point, Madison started talking about the ceremony schedule. Who would welcome guests? Who would speak on behalf of the family? Who would be listed as official sponsors for one of the event permits tied to the venue? She read the names out loud. Mine wasn't there. Then her phone rang. A video call. Someone from the local community board. A distant relative who also happened to be involved in approvals for large events in the area. She put it on speaker, smiling the way people smile when they want to look organized. They talked logistics, noise limits, parking, liability. Then the man on the screen said, "And just to confirm, who's the legal representative signing off on this portion?" Madison answered quickly. She gave Ryan's name, then added someone else. Then said, "We've got it covered." No pause, no hesitation. I noticed the way Ryan shifted in his chair. He knew. Linda kept her eyes on the counter. The man on the screen glanced down at his notes. "I don't see Ethan listed anymore." The room went quiet. Madison laughed, lightly. "Oh, yeah. That changed. We're keeping it more streamlined, just immediate family." The word landed and stayed there. Nobody looked at me. The call ended a minute later. Polite goodbyes. Screen went dark. Plates clinked. Someone cleared their throat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I just asked one question. "So who's handling the guarantees on that permit?" Now Madison didn't answer right away. She looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at Linda. Linda stared at the table. Someone said, "We'll figure it out." I nodded. That was the moment I understood something I'd missed for years. People don't usually push you out loudly. They don't announce it. They just start making decisions as if you're no longer part of the structure. They talk around you. They finalize things without you. They assume your role can be removed without affecting the system. That assumption is dangerous, because real influence rarely sits where people are loudest. It sits where signatures live, where approvals originate, where responsibility quietly rests. Most people confuse presence with power. If you're not speaking, they assume you don't have any. If you're not asserting, they think you're irrelevant. What they don't see is that silence is often a choice. And restraint doesn't mean absence. I'd spent years being the person who handled things quietly, the one who knew which office to call, which form mattered, which signature carried weight. That kind of power doesn't announce itself at dinner tables. It waits. Madison went back to her notes, pretending nothing had happened. The conversation moved on. Seating charts, guest counts, flower vendors. Linda finally sat down again. But she didn't look at me. I didn't interrupt, because by then, the shift was clear. I wasn't being excluded by accident. I was being reorganized out of the picture, and everyone at that table believed it would cost them nothing. That's the mistake people make when they underestimate quiet authority. They think if you don't react, you don't matter. They think if you don't protest, you agree. They think if you've always handled things, you always will. The most powerful moves don't happen in arguments. They happen after the room goes quiet. I finished my meal, folded my napkin, stood up. I'm going to head out. I said, "Early morning tomorrow." No one stopped me. No one asked what I meant by the question I'd asked, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. Because when people are truly confident in their position, they explain it. When they aren't, they avoid the conversation altogether. That night wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was definitive. And the people who thought they'd just cleaned up a guest list had no idea they'd just removed the wrong name from the system. The next morning, I woke up early. Same routine. Coffee. Quiet house. Desert light coming through the window. My phone buzzed while I was standing at the counter. An email. Short subject line. Neutral tone. It was from Madison. Ryan was CC'd. And then I saw another name in the CC line. Linda. I opened it and read it once, then again. There was no anger in the words, no insults, no raised voice hiding behind punctuation. That almost made it worse. They said they'd talked things through. They said they were on the same page. They said they'd agreed it would be better if I wasn't involved in the parts of the wedding that represented real family. That phrase again? Real family. Then came the second paragraph. They asked if I could continue handling the paperwork I'd already been helping with. The permits, the guarantees, the registrations that still had my name attached. They called it technical support. They said it would be temporary. They said it would mean a lot if I didn't make things complicated at such an important time. I didn't feel angry reading it. I felt something quieter. I noticed how carefully it was written, how every sentence avoided responsibility, how no one actually asked me anything. They weren't requesting my help. They were assuming it. That's when it clicked. This wasn't a fight. It was a downgrade. They weren't pushing me out emotionally. They were reorganizing me administratively, reducing me from a person to a function. Useful, but invisible. Necessary, but not presentable. I scrolled back up and looked at the CC line again. Linda's name was there, not in the body, not in the explanation, just there. Silent agreement. That hurt more than the words themselves. I realized something else in that moment. When people believe you'll always say yes, they stop checking if they're being fair. When they think you're conflict-averse, they assume compliance is part of your character. They confuse patience with permission. I set the phone down and sat at the table. For years, I'd been careful not to make things awkward, careful not to insert myself where I wasn't invited, careful not to push back when decisions were made without me. I told myself that was maturity. But reading that email, I saw it clearly for the first time. My silence hadn't kept the peace. It had trained them. Every form I'd signed, every guarantee I'd quietly carried, every late-night fix I'd handled without complaint. Those things hadn't earned trust. They'd erased it. Because when support becomes predictable, people stop seeing it as a choice. They start seeing it as infrastructure, something that just exists, something that doesn't need to be thanked, something that shouldn't get in the way of appearances. I didn't reply right away. I opened the attachments they'd included, updated documents, revised lists, my name removed from one section and kept in another. Speaker no, representative no, guarantor yes. That was the balance they wanted. All responsibility, no recognition. I read it slowly, line by line, the way I read contracts, and that's when I understood how far this had gone. They weren't acting out of cruelty. They were acting out of certainty. Certainty that I wouldn't object. Certainty that I'd absorb the discomfort the way I always had. They believed I wouldn't disrupt anything, because I never had before. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, everything looked the same. Road, dust, sky, nothing dramatic. That's how these moments usually are. Quiet, ordinary. Easy to dismiss if you're not paying attention. But this one mattered, because once someone puts it in writing, once they reduce your place in their life to a bullet point, and a CC, you can't pretend it was just a misunderstanding. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a position paper. And my name was being used in it without my consent. I didn't argue with the email. I didn't forward it to anyone. I didn't call to clarify. I saved it. Because now, for the first time, everything was clear. They'd made their decision together. They'd done it calmly, collectively, on record. And they'd done it believing I would carry the weight quietly, like I always had. They were wrong. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because responsibility without respect isn't generosity, it's exploitation. And the moment someone assumes you'll accept that arrangement forever is the moment you need to decide who you are. I finished my coffee, closed my laptop, and for the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel confused. I felt certain. They'd shown me exactly where I stood. Now it was my turn to respond, not emotionally, not loudly, but correctly. That afternoon, I drove to the county offices. Not the courthouse, not some glass tower in a city. A low building off the highway with faded flags out front and a parking lot full of work trucks. Inside, it smelled like paper and old air conditioning. Harold Bennett's office was down a hallway, lined with bulletin boards and laminated notices. Harold wasn't dramatic. He wasn't the kind of lawyer who talked like he was in a movie. He was practical, quiet. He'd been doing this long enough to know that most conflicts aren't loud. They're administrative. He looked up when I walked in. "Ethan." I sat down. I didn't waste time. "I have a question." I said, "If my name is on documents as the legal representative, can I remove myself?" Harold didn't react. He just reached for a notepad like he'd heard that question 1,000 times. "What documents?" he asked. I slid my phone across the desk and showed him the email, the attachments, the revised lists, the sections where my name had been removed from anything public but kept on anything binding. Harold read without expression. When he finished, he leaned back and said, "Yes, you can withdraw." I nodded once. How clean is the paperwork," he said. "If you're listed as a guarantor, a sponsor, or a representative, you can revoke that authorization, but you need to do it properly, in writing, to the right parties, with clear language. I didn't ask if it would hurt them. I asked what it would do." Harold tapped the desk with his pen. "It will pause things. It will trigger review. It may force them to reapply under someone else's name. Some parts might get delayed. Some might get denied until the correct person with the correct standing steps in. I kept my voice even. And if they don't have someone else with standing," Harold looked at me for a second. Just long enough to confirm I understood what I was asking. "Then it doesn't move forward," he said. "Not legally." There was a moment of silence after that. Not emotional silence. Mechanical silence. Like when a machine stops and you realize how much you relied on the noise. I nodded again. "Okay." Harold didn't lecture me. He didn't ask me about family. He didn't tell me to calm down. He just said, "If you want to proceed, I'll draft a withdrawal notice you can send. Or you can send it yourself. But if you send it yourself, you need to use the right language. I'll send it myself," I said. Because this wasn't about having someone fight for me. It was about refusing to keep holding liability for people who'd made it clear they didn't want me holding anything else. Harold printed a simple template. 3 paragraphs. Plain English. No insults, no accusations. Just facts. I drove home, parked in the driveway, walked inside. The house was quiet. Linda wasn't there. She'd gone into town. I sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and pulled up the county portal where half these forms lived. I opened the documents one by one. There were my signatures, my name, my address, my responsibility, and next to them, the updated planning documents from Madison, where I didn't exist. That contrast was clarifying. So I wrote an email. Subject line: withdrawal of authorization and representation. I addressed it to the permitting office, the venue coordinator, and the community board contact from the video call. I CC'd Harold, I CC'd Madison, I CC'd Ryan, I CC'd Linda. Then I wrote 3 sentences that changed everything. I am withdrawing my authorization as legal representative and guarantor for the following applications and permits, effective immediately. Any use of my name or signature for these matters moving forward is not authorized. Please update your records and direct all further correspondence to the new designated representative. That was it? No blame. No, how could you? No emotional paragraphs. Just a door closing. Properly. I attached the reference numbers, application IDs, permit tracking codes. Harold had told me to be specific, so I was. Because when you do this the right way, the system doesn't care who's mad, it cares what's documented. I read the email once, then again. Then I looked at the CC line, and for the first time in a long time, I understood what real power looks like. Not volume, not arguments, not the ability to make someone feel small at a dinner table. Real power is the ability to remove your name from the part that keeps everything running. I clicked send. There was no sound after that, no dramatic music, no slammed doors, just a notification that the message had left my outbox. And within minutes, the replies started. Not from Madison, not from Ryan, from the county, from the venue, from the board. Short messages. Professional tone. The kind of language that means something is now flagged, receipt acknowledged, application status updated, additional documentation required, processing paused pending new representative. That's the part most people don't understand. You can argue with family for hours and nothing changes. But when the system marks something as incomplete, everything stops. By the time Linda came home, I'd already closed the laptop. I was washing my mug in the sink. She walked in, put her purse down, and looked at me like she could sense a shift in the air. "What did you do?" she asked. I dried my hands slowly. I removed myself. I said. She stared at me, confused. From what I didn't explain. Not yet, because the email would do that for me. The paperwork would do that for me. The consequences would do that for me. I went back to the table and sat down. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for them to decide where I fit. I'd already decided what I was no longer willing to carry. The first call came less than an hour after I sent the email. It was Ryan. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He sounded like a man trying very hard to be reasonable. "Ethan," he said, "can we talk about this like adults?" I was sitting at the same kitchen table, coffee going cold, laptop closed. I said. There was a pause. Like he didn't know what to do with that. He cleared his throat. "Look, the county's flagging things. The venue coordinator just called Madison. They're saying the application is paused." "I know." I said, "Okay. But why would you do that?" he asked. "This affects a lot of people." I let him finish. Then I said, "It affects the people whose names are on it. Mine was..." He tried a softer tone. "Madison didn't mean it the way it came out. That's not what she wrote," I said. He went quiet again. Then he said, "She's stressed. The wedding, the community stuff. It's a lot. I didn't send that email." I said, "She did." Ryan exhaled like he was losing patience. "So, what do you want?" An apology I didn't answer right away, because the moment you say what you want, People start negotiating it. I said, I want you to understand what you asked me to be. What do you mean, I said. You asked me to carry the liability and stay out of the picture. You asked me to do the work and disappear. That's not, it is. I said, still calm. It's in writing. He didn't have a comeback for that. He finally said, okay. Fine. I get it. So, what now? Now, I said. You find someone else to sign? I ended the call. The second call came from Linda. She didn't start with anger. She started with her voice breaking. Ethan, she said, please, you can't do this. I could hear her walking around, drawer opening, closing, like she needed her hands busy to keep her emotions from spilling over. I already did it. I said. She took a shaky breath. Madison is calling me. She's crying. People are calling her. The board, the venue. Everyone's asking questions. I know. I said. Then why aren't you stopping it? She asked. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I asked one question. Linda, did you read the email you put your name on silence? Not because she didn't hear me. Because she did. I didn't think it was that serious. She said, finally. It was just Madison trying to keep things simple. Simple. I repeated, Ethan, you know how she is. Linda said. She gets in her head. She says things. She doesn't mean Linda. I said, when someone tells you who you are to them, believe them. She started crying harder then. Not loud, just worn down. You're punishing us, she said. This feels like revenge. That word, revenge. People throw it around when they don't like the consequences of what they did. I didn't argue with her, I said. If I wanted revenge, I'd be trying to hurt Madison. Linda sniffed. And you're not, no. I said, I'm trying to stop myself from getting hurt again. She didn't respond. So I kept going. Quiet and steady. There's a difference. Revenge is when you want someone else to bleed. Self-respect is when you stop donating your own blood. Linda's breathing got uneven. You could have talked to us, she said. I did. I said, at the dinner. I asked one question. Nobody answered it. I didn't know what to say, she whispered. That was an answer. I said. The next call was from Madison. Her voice was different than it had been at dinner. At dinner, she sounded certain. Now she sounded cornered. Ethan, she said. Fast. Like if she spoke quickly enough, she could outrun what was happening. Okay. This is getting out of hand. The county is literally pausing things. People are calling Ryan's parents. They're calling the board. This is embarrassing. I let that sit. Embarrassing. Not heartbreaking. Not wrong. Embarrassing. She continued. I don't know why you're doing this. It was a misunderstanding. That email wasn't supposed to be harsh. It wasn't harsh. I said, it was clear. Fine. She snapped. I'm sorry. Is that what you want? I didn't react. Because apologies that arrive after consequences aren't apologies. They're strategies, I said. Madison, you didn't insult me. You categorized me. What does that even mean? It means you decided where I belong. I said, behind the scenes. Off the list. Useful, but not welcome. That's not, it is. I said, and you didn't even think you had to ask. You thought I'd accept it. She sounded like she wanted to scream. Instead, she tried another angle. Okay, look, you can come. You can be included. We can fix the schedule. The speech list, whatever. Just, can you undo the email I didn't answer right away? Because that was the moment. The moment where people offer you a seat after they've already told you you don't belong at the table. I said. I don't want a seat you only offer when the system stops moving. Her voice went small. So you're just going to ruin everything I kept my tone even. I didn't ruin anything. I said, I withdrew my name from something you didn't want my face attached to. That's not fair, she whispered. I didn't soften it. Fair would have been you making your choice and paying your own price. I said. You wanted to make the choice and hand me the bill. She started crying then. Real crying. Ethan, please, she said. I didn't realize I know, I said, and I meant it. That was the whole problem. She hadn't realized, because she'd never had to. For years, I was the quiet solution in the background. The one who handled the messy parts so she could keep her hands clean. I said, I'm not angry because you don't see me as your father. I never asked you to. She sniffed. I'm angry because you see me as disposable and still expect me to be responsible. She didn't respond, so I said the only thing that mattered. If my presence is only welcome when I'm useful. I told her, that's not family. That's a transaction. The line went quiet. Then Madison said, barely audible, what do you want me to do? I didn't tell her what to say. I didn't tell her how to feel. I said, I want you to do what adults do. Live with the consequences of what you put in writing. I ended the call. After that, the phone kept ringing. An aunt I'd met twice, a guy from the local board who wanted to smooth things over, someone I barely knew telling me I was making a scene. And that was the part that made me almost laugh. Because I hadn't made a scene, I hadn't posted anything, I hadn't dragged anyone in public. All I did was stop carrying what I'd been carrying. And people who benefit from your silence always call it cruelty when you finally stop. That night, Linda sat on the edge of the couch, face blotchy, hands folded like she was praying. She said, I don't recognize you. I looked at her. I'm the same man, I said. You're just seeing what I look like when I don't volunteer to be used. She flinched at that. And I didn't take it back, because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for your own life is say the truth without dressing it up. They kept calling it revenge. But revenge is loud. Revenge wants an audience. This wasn't that. This was me drawing a line so simple it could fit in an email. I'm not here to make you hurt. I'm here to make sure I stop hurting. And if that changes your world, maybe your world was built on my silence. That night, the house felt bigger than it was. Not because it was empty. Because nobody was speaking to me anymore. Not in the way that mattered. Linda had gone quiet after the calls. Madison stopped texting. Ryan stopped trying to sound reasonable. The noise moved outside the house. County emails, voicemails, people asking questions without asking me. I came home late, same way I had for years, keys on the hook, boots by the door. I didn't turn on the TV, I didn't pour a drink. I walked straight to the small desk in the corner of the living room, the one nobody ever noticed unless they needed something printed. I opened my laptop, not to argue, not to explain, just to make sure the truth existed somewhere that wasn't my memory. I had a little black hard drive in my drawer. Nothing fancy, no lights, no logo, just a tool. I plugged it in, and the first folder that opened wasn't labeled wedding. It was labeled Madison. Inside were years, forms, receipts, PDFs, screenshots, confirmation emails. There were county permit applications with my name on the signature line. There were insurance certificates I'd been asked to just handle. There were fee payments I'd made because the deadline is today. There were messages from Madison that said things like, "Can you sign this real quick? Can you put this under your name so it goes through just until we get approved?" Ryan had a folder too. Not because I wanted one, because when you're the person who fixes problems, you end up keeping proof by accident, not to use it, just because you don't throw away paperwork when you've been burned before. I clicked through one file after another. Each one was small by itself. A $240 filing fee, a $150 bond, a permit renewal, a compliance form, a vendor contract that required a responsible party, my name, my phone number, my address, and I realized something that shouldn't have surprised me, but still did. They didn't just want me out of the pictures. They wanted me in the fine print. I leaned back in the chair, not angry, just clear. Then I did something I hadn't planned to do. I opened a blank document, and I started listing it. Not every penny, not every favor, just the things that had one thing in common. They only existed because I was there. I typed the dates, the titles, the permit numbers, the email threads. I copied the timestamps, because time doesn't argue. Time doesn't exaggerate. Time just sits there, like a witness. When I finished, it was longer than I expected. Not dramatic, just heavy. I printed it. 1 page turned into 3. 3 turned into 6. I stapled it cleanly, like it mattered, because it did. Then I wrote 1 short letter. No speeches, no guilt, no threats. Just a few lines, in the same calm tone I'd used all week. I'm not leaving this to hurt you. I'm leaving it so you can't pretend you didn't know. Everything you called technical was carried by a real person. This is what not family looks like on paper. I folded the letter once. I placed it on top of the stack. Then I unplugged the hard drive. I held it for a second in my hand. It was strange how light it was, how something that small could hold years of being necessary. I walked into the kitchen. The overhead light made the counters look cold. I set the hard drive on the table, right where Linda used to put the mail, right where Madison used to toss her keys when she visited and acted like it was still her home. I set the papers beside it, neat, unemotional, unavoidable. Then I stood there for a moment, listening to the house, the air conditioner clicking, a dog barking somewhere down the street, that dry desert quiet that makes every sound feel like a decision. And that's when the extra truth landed. The one they still didn't understand. This wasn't about me ruining anything. Madison and Ryan had never been eligible on their own for some of what they were trying to do. They didn't have the credit. They didn't have the history. They didn't have the clean record the county likes to see when you're asking for permits and approvals. So years ago, when they were trying to launch their little project, they came to me. Not for advice, for a name, for a signature, for a person the system would accept. I was the bridge, and a bridge doesn't get invited to the party. A bridge just gets walked on. Until the day it's removed, I didn't take anything from them. I didn't expose them online. I didn't call the whole town. I just left the evidence where it belonged. On the table, in the center of the house that they said was theirs. So the next time someone tried to call me petty, they'd have to say it while looking at my name on every page. I turned off the kitchen light, and before I went to bed, I checked the lock on the front door, not because I was afraid, because I was done leaving things open for people who never learned how to knock. The next morning, the first message didn't come from Madison. It came from a county clerk I'd never met. Short, polite, clinical. Mr. Walker, we received your update. Please confirm whether you're withdrawing as the responsible party on file. That's how it starts. Not with yelling, not with tears, with a form that suddenly has nobody's name on the line that matters. By 8:30, my phone was vibrating like it had something to prove. Unknown numbers. Voicemails from numbers I recognized but hadn't heard from in years. And the funny thing is, nobody asked how I was doing. They asked what I did. I made coffee. I sat at the table. I didn't call anyone back. I just watched the consequences move through the day like weather. 1 permit went into review. That's what they call it when the answer is no, but they don't want to say no yet. A vendor contract got flagged because the insurance certificate didn't match the new filing. A bond that had been approved under my name got placed on hold until verification. One signature disappears, and suddenly people who have never read a single line of county code learn what processing delay feels like. By mid-morning, the town started doing what small towns always do. It talked, not loudly, not publicly, just enough that you could feel it. At the hardware store, two guys I'd waved at for years stopped their conversation when I walked in. At the gas station, a woman I barely knew smiled too hard and said, "Morning." "Ethan," like she was testing whether I was still safe to greet. By lunch, it wasn't just something happened, it was Ethan did something. And that's when the story changed in people's heads. I wasn't the quiet guy who kept his head down. I was the quiet guy who could stop a whole chain of approvals with one email. It made them nervous. It made them curious. It made them pretend they'd always respected me. I got my first call from Ryan at 12:17. He didn't say hello. He said my name like it was a problem he needed solved. "Ethan, we need to talk." I didn't answer. At 12:31, Linda called. Her voice was shaking, but she wasn't crying yet. Why are people calling me? I stayed quiet. Not to punish her, just because anything I said would turn into a debate, and I wasn't interested in debating my place in my own life. At 12:46, Madison finally texted. Not an apology, not a question, a statement. "Do you know what you just did?" That line told me everything I needed to know. She still thought the world moved because she wanted it to. That if something stopped, it meant somebody was being mean to her. She didn't understand the simplest truth. The law doesn't get offended. The law doesn't misunderstand. The law doesn't care who's right. It cares who's responsible. And responsibility has paperwork. By early afternoon, the calls turned into pressure. A community partner, someone involved in the event, somebody with a title. They didn't threaten me. They did something worse. They spoke to me like I was supposed to be ashamed. "Ethan, come on. This isn't the time." As if there's ever a convenient time to learn you've been reduced to a tool. As if dignity is something you schedule around other people's plans. Then came the voicemail that stuck. It was from a man I'd met twice at a local meeting, a guy who liked the sound of his own voice. He said, "We thought you were a good man. Don't prove us wrong." I listened to it once, then I deleted it, because I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I drove past the vineyard that afternoon. You could see the rows of vines from the road, neat and expensive looking, like they belonged to someone who never had to ask permission. There were trucks parked outside, people moving things, a tent frame half built in the distance. Everything looked normal, but it wasn't, because behind every normal event is an invisible spine of approvals, and when that spine goes weak, the whole body starts to wobble. By late afternoon, Madison's panic finally showed itself, not in what she said, in how fast she said it. She called 3 times back to back. Then she sent a voice note. Her breathing was sharp, like she'd been running. "Ethan, this is getting out of control. People are saying we might lose the deposit. We might not get the permit in time. You need to fix this. Fix this." Like I was the maintenance guy for her life. Like the last 14 years hadn't taught her the difference between support and entitlement. Then Linda called again. This time, she was crying. Not the quiet kind. The kind that comes when your world is slipping and you don't know who to blame. "You're embarrassing us," she said. And I noticed she didn't say, "You're hurting us." She said, "You're embarrassing us." That's the word people use when the problem isn't the damage. It's the exposure. The phone kept ringing, but what changed was the tone. At first, they were angry. Then they were urgent. And then finally they were careful. Because now they understood something they should have understood years ago. The man they were trying to erase wasn't just paying for things. He was holding things together, not with charm, not with loud authority, with signatures, with responsibility, with the kind of boring, invisible power that only shows up when it's gone. And I kept doing the same thing. I worked, I ate, I let the calls pile up, because the more they scrambled, the more obvious it became. This wasn't a mistake. This was the system doing exactly what it was designed to do. When the responsible party steps away, everything stops and asks, "Who's next?" And that's the question nobody in my family was ready to answer. Not yet. Not without me. And that's when I knew they'd try one more move. Not to make things right, just to get me back in place. So they could keep going like nothing happened. That night, Linda showed up at the rental house without calling first. She didn't knock like someone visiting. She knocked like someone trying to get back in before the door locked for good. When I opened it, she was holding her phone in one hand and her keys in the other, like she didn't know which one mattered more anymore. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. Too steady. "I don't understand you," she said. "You're blowing everything up over one email." I stepped back and let her in. Not because I wanted to talk, because I wanted the silence to do its job. She walked into the kitchen and stopped. The hard drive was still on the table. The printed letter was still there. She didn't touch them. She just stared at them the way people stare at a wreck they can't admit they caused. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said. I didn't argue. I didn't remind her of every time I swallowed a comment to keep the peace. I just pulled out a chair and sat down. And after a long minute, I said the only honest thing left. "Linda, I don't hate Madison. That got her attention, because she wanted me to. She wanted a villain, a tantrum, a moment she could point to and tell herself. See, he's the problem. But I didn't give her that. I don't hate her," I said again. "But I'm not going to teach a grown woman how to respect people. That's not my job. And it's too late for lessons that should have started when she was 15. Linda's mouth opened, then closed. She looked toward the hallway like Madison might walk in and rescue her from the conversation. But there was nobody coming. Just us. And the truth. "She didn't mean it like that," Linda whispered. I nodded. "Once. I know what she meant," I said. "And I know what she didn't mean." Linda sat down across from me. Her hands were shaking now, but she tried to hide it by gripping the edge of the table. "She's under stress," she said. "The wedding, the partners, the county, people talking. Ryan's family is furious." "And where was that concern?" I asked. Calm. When I was the one being erased, Linda flinched like the words hit her in the ribs. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Because the problem wasn't volume, it was reality. There's a story we get taught in families like ours. If you're the steady one, you're supposed to stay steady. If you're the provider, you're supposed to keep providing. If you love someone, you're supposed to absorb whatever they throw at you and call it loyalty. But there's a line nobody talks about. The line where patience stops being love and starts being permission. Because when you keep swallowing disrespect, you don't just hurt yourself, you train people. You teach them your limits don't count. You teach them your presence is negotiable. You teach them the family can lean on you forever and never look you in the eye. I looked at Linda and said it as plainly as I could. There's a difference between keeping peace and protecting a family. She blinked. I could tell she didn't want to hear it, but she needed to. Keeping peace is what you do when the argument is about opinions. I said, protecting a family is what you do when someone is being treated like they don't matter. Linda's breath caught. "You're her stepfather," she said. Like the title itself was supposed to fix everything. I said, when I was allowed to be. And then I said the part that hurt her the most, because it was the part she couldn't deny. You stayed quiet, I told her, and I'm not saying you meant harm, but silence isn't neutral when it happens long enough. Linda looked down at her hands. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. A lot of people think standing up means making a scene. They think it means humiliating someone back, or tearing the whole thing down just to feel powerful for a minute. That's not what I did. I didn't use the system to embarrass them. I used it to remove myself from a role I was never respected in. I didn't sabotage. I withdrew. There's a difference. If you build a structure on someone's unspoken labor, and they stop doing it, that's not cruelty. That's reality catching up. Linda wiped her face with the back of her hand. So what now, she asked. Are you just done? I looked around the kitchen. The cheap table. The plain cabinets. The kind of place that never made it into family photos because it didn't look impressive enough. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. I'm not trying to win. I said, I'm trying to live. I stood up and walked to the counter, picked up an envelope that had been sitting there for a week, a lease offer, a small place farther out, quieter, less traffic, less noise, less pretending. I'm leaving this house, I said, and I'm leaving the parts of this family that only existed when I was useful. Linda stared at the envelope like it was a death certificate. You can't just walk away, she said. I looked at her, and I kept my voice steady. I said, because I'm not breaking anything that was built on respect. I'm only stepping away from what was built on my silence. She didn't respond. She couldn't. Because deep down, she knew what I was saying was true. I didn't ask her to choose me over her daughter. I didn't ask for apologies that wouldn't mean anything. I didn't ask for a seat at a table where my name could be erased with one email. I just chose something different. Not revenge, not bitterness, just a line in the sand. And for the first time in a long time, I slept like a man who wasn't waiting to be used again. If you're watching this, and you feel that tight feeling in your chest, there's a reason. It's not because you love drama. It's because you recognize the position, the one person everyone leans on, the one person who fixes things quietly, the one person who gets called when there's a crisis and forgotten when there's a celebration. Maybe you're the one who always pays, always drives, always signs, always shows up early and leaves late. And you tell yourself it's fine, because you're strong, because you're responsible, because that's what adults do. But there's a difference between being reliable and being taken for granted. And most people don't notice the moment they cross that line. It's small at first. The thank you starts disappearing. The favors stop sounding like requests and start sounding like schedules. Your boundaries get laughed at. Or worse, they get labeled. Too sensitive. Making a big deal. Why are you being like this? And the most telling one is this: you're only remembered when someone needs something. If you wait until somebody looks you in the face and says, you're not really family, the price is going to be high, because by then, the pattern is cemented. And you'll be trying to change it in the middle of an explosion. You don't have to do it that way. Self-respect doesn't start with you disappearing. It starts with you speaking clearly. This, I'm willing to do, and this, I'm not as a threat, not as a speech, just as a fact. Because any relationship, family, marriage, friendship, business, if it only works because one person keeps swallowing everything, it's not stable, it's a delay, and one day, it will collapse anyway. Here's what I learned the hard way. Real power isn't yelling louder, it isn't slamming doors, it isn't proving you're right in the middle of an argument. Real power is knowing what you actually hold, what you're responsible for, what you've been quietly carrying, and making sure nobody builds their comfort on your silence. So if this story hit you, don't wait until you have to make one cold email and disappear inside a system just to feel human again. Draw the line while you're still in the room, because the people who truly value you won't fear your boundaries. They'll respect them. And the people who only value what you provide, they'll reveal themselves the moment you stop providing it.